Ominous? After nearly 2 decades in the car industry and more than a decade of seemingly going nowhere, BYD made a transformative hidden change. Not hidden by BYD, but by a naming convention, and went from never being a leading contender within China at number 17 in 2020 to number 1 by 2024, and taken seriously to become global number 1 car maker. But the ominous part is what happens next, and what that hidden change means for the industry and global economy. Welcome to One Finite Planet, a channel on our journey to a new age, today focusing on BYD's rise towards becoming number 1 auto brand and the ominous signs of what's to follow and bring a wrecking ball to the established industry. Chapters: the data, the surprising numbers revealing the sources of BYD's rise. The change, what took BYD from seemingly going nowhere to unprecedented growth. Why the first attempts at this strategy failed, and how the technology lost having its own name in a holy war. Why hidden? Why ominous? And what's next? Okay, the data. The numbers tell the story. A lift in 2008, then going nowhere until 2020 when boom, from stuck around 17th in China to year by year, 12th, 6th, 2nd and then 1st. Some change helped them overtake by far previously stronger Chinese rivals, Geely, Chang'an, Wuling and FAW, and even more successful established foreign automakers, 20-year number 1 VW, plus GM, Hyundai, Nissan and Honda. And now what makes BYD different than most people realise? Adding in the vehicle types shows that before the rise, BYD was mostly a traditional combustion engine vehicle maker. But the rise was almost in equal parts EV-based PHEVs and EVs. Both types started earlier, in 2008 and 2010 respectively, with sales only making an impact on the graph from 2014. By 2017, PHEVs had peaked and EVs were starting to grow, but at the expense of traditional ICEs, internal combustion engine vehicles. Total sales were flat at best. This is the pattern we see with most traditional brands still today. EVs rise, but as ICEs fall, so totals remain fixed or worse. But for BYD, from after 2020, both EVs and PHEVs really took off in around equal numbers. In fact, as this column graph of BYD sales from 2020 on highlights, PHEV sales grew from a lower base but faster than EV sales. This is unusual in China and globally. As you see from the graph, EVs outsell PHEVs typically by more than 2 to 1. But not for BYD. For BYD, the sales number equal. And here's the market share, first within China. For BYD, their PHEV market share is double their EV market share. And here, overlaid globally, the same pattern. Many think of BYD as an EV company, but in many ways, they're first a PHEV company and second an EV company. Most global automotive brands are managing a balance between ICE vehicles and EVs. But for BYD, traditional ICE vehicle sales collapsed and then ended. But PHEV growth alone matched the loss of ICE vehicle sales. Everything became a plug-in. No traditional brand outside China is about to even try something so bold. This is the first step, seeing that BYD's rise so far has been even more about dominating PHEV sales than EV sales. So what changed? Perhaps surprisingly, the numbers reveal the growth's been more about PHEVs than EVs. But what change triggered that growth? A change that triggered more growth in PHEVs than EVs, but saw the market share in both skyrocket. What the evidence makes clear is that it was a change from taking a traditional ICE vehicle and electrifying it to make a plug-in hybrid, to adding a combustion power generator to an EV to make a plug-in hybrid. ICE vehicle-based plug-in hybrids start with an ICE vehicle platform and then add an electric motor, and a battery to boost performance relative to the engine size. Other than for high-performance vehicles, the combination doesn't blend as well as a non-plug-in hybrid, adding weight and complexity. It does boost performance, but although it can gain some efficiency standards, in practice there are at best small gains in efficiency, and generally any EV mode is highly compromised. EV-based plug-in hybrids start with an EV, then exchange the full-size battery for a smaller battery plus a genset or combustion-powered generator. By using an engine designed to power a genset instead of a car, that allows the cost and weight to be kept lower than the equivalent EV version. So the result is a lighter, lower cost version of the original, and overall less complex and expensive vehicle than results when you start from a conventional internal combustion engine vehicle. See content in the description for more. The change is more significant than it may appear at first, with the key difference being ICE-based PHEVs share production lines, factories and parts with traditional ICE-Vs, which allows maintaining the margins on those traditional vehicles, while EV-based PHEVs share production, factories and parts with EVs, assisting profitability and margins on EVs. But how does this change in how PHEVs are made compare with other explanations? Some suggest the big surge was because BYD make their own batteries, but they always did. Why the sudden change in 2020? Vertical integration. That began even before they got into cars. It has to be something that changed. Government assistance. Well, Chinese government supports car makers, but in 2020 there were 6 Chinese brands ahead of BYD, with the highest ranking Geely at number 4, while BYD was number 17. How did government assistance help BYD overtake other Chinese brands? When the EU analysed Chinese brands' government assistance, they determined BYD received the lowest level of assistance of Chinese brands. So government support would have helped BYD overall, but doesn't explain them rising so much faster than other Chinese brands. The Blade battery. Well, there are reasons why, although the Blade battery would have contributed to the rise, it can't explain it alone. Consider, the Blade battery was offered to all in the industry. BYD's a battery maker, and it wasn't just for BYD Automotive to use. DMI vehicle sales, the plug-in hybrids, increased significantly faster than EV sales, and the battery is more critical for EVs. The timing of the boost of sales aligns better with the release of DMI plug-in hybrids than with the Blade battery. Other brands saw significant jumps in BEV sales in 2021 and 22, but none had anything comparable to the jump in plug-in hybrid sales that BYD had. BYD market share of EVs went from 11.7 to 17%. The PHEV market share went from 19.2 to 63%. The benefit of plug-in hybrids becoming EV-based means both benefit from the scale and cost reductions from a common platform type. In the year following the introduction of the Blade battery, EV market share fell. But in the year when platform volumes could be combined, EV market share rose 70%. And combining platforms took BYD from under half Tesla scale for EV platform vehicles to 1.3 times Tesla scale EV platform vehicles in just 1 year. And this is the change. It's not just the change to plug-in hybrids being based on EV platforms. It's all vehicles being based on EV platforms, both pure EVs and vehicles with a gasoline engine, meaning you can address all possible customers with just one platform type. Now a bit of both BYD and plug-in hybrid history, how the first attempt at EV-based PHEVs failed, and they lost out having their own different non-hybrid name in an EV holy war. BYD began in the Yadi district within Shenzhen as Yadi Electronics, but had already become BYD by the official incorporation on the 10th of February 1995. Translating that 3 Chinese character name to the BYD would have been needed for opening their European office in Rotterdam in 1998. No, the cringeworthy Build Your Dreams was not there from the outset. It was chosen as a backronym over perhaps more fun options like Big Yellow Duck. According to reports, as late as 2008, 13 years after the company began. BYD may have some highly skilled staff, but I find little evidence of them being in the international names department. That the goal from the outset was to get into cars and EVs soon became apparent. Just 6 months after the July 2002 Hong Kong IPO, BYD acquired a struggling car company with the stated goal of gaining an automotive manufacturing platform. Then, just 1 year later, in 2004, presented the pure battery EV ET show car. In 2006, the production-ready F3e. But here's where the plans changed. After doing their market research, they decided infrastructure was not ready for pure EVs, and a solution to reduce costs, improve range, and overcome infrastructure limits was needed. Unlike Tesla, who just a few years later decided the solution was building their own charging network, BYD went plug-in hybrids. And just 2 months after securing funding from Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway, they released the 2008 BYD F3DM, described by BYD as dual mode and the world's first mass production plug-in hybrid, which distinguished it from the Ferdinand Porsche-designed Lerner Porsche Mixster from over 100 years earlier, because although that vehicle was also an EV-based plug-in, vehicles at the time weren't really mass-produced. So already, back in 2008, they had an EV-based plug-in hybrid. And then GM in 2010, then Honda, BMW and Mitsubishi. Most of the major brands that had dabbled with EVs, plus Fisker, all tried this technology, but commercially they all failed. The 2010 GM Volt was, for the time, the most successful. But not wanting the vehicle to be considered a hybrid, they chose and heavily promoted the label EREV, Extended Range Electric Vehicle. But was it really still some type of EV if also fully drivable on gasoline? The result was an EV purity holy war, which could be considered settled by CARB, the California Air Resources Board, the only formal body to define extended range electric vehicle. Their definition was very restrictive on how you could use that combustion engine to generate electricity. You couldn't use it until you'd already used all the electric range. You had to plug in again. And then you could only travel a certain distance. The end result was the only vehicle that ever qualified had to software restrict using its full gasoline tank for generating electricity to power the vehicle. You couldn't even drive it until fully empty. But by 2014, it became academic. ICE vehicle-based PHEVs took over because they were based on established, successful production vehicles. And that was the flaw with all of those first-generation EV-based plug-in hybrids. That F3DM from BYD, it also died by 2014, replaced by a vehicle based on an established, conventional ICE vehicle platform. The F3DM took over 10 seconds for the 0 to 100 kilometres per hour, was expensive, slow, and not based on a true production EV-based platform. They sold at best around 1,000 per year. The replacements were faster, but overall they still remained relatively niche vehicles. The big change came in 2020. BYD, with now several years as a significant producer of EVs, had a genuine production EV platform to which they could add the genset concept as a new way to make a vehicle that could be driven as an EV or on gasoline power. So, why hidden? The fact that a different name, other than being called hybrid or PHEV, never stuck, can be seen as a regulation failure because, from an emissions perspective, the result is so different that applying the same regulations to both EV-based plug-in hybrids and combustion engine-based plug-in hybrids makes little sense. China gets around this problem without a specific label, by prescribing outcomes rather than the technologies to achieve them. It has the category of NEV, New Energy Vehicle, And you can qualify as a plug-in hybrid, but you don't automatically qualify as a plug-in hybrid. To qualify, you have to meet a target EV mode efficiency, a target sustain mode or gasoline mode efficiency, and a target EV mode range, which has now reached 100 km and demands a relatively high power battery. Effectively, at some point, if the electric system is already capable of delivering essentially all required traction performance, the question becomes, why keep paying for a 6 or 8 speed transmission and a high output traction engine? You see, the problem is, the more engine you carry, the more thermal mass and heat loss generated just to keep the engine warm, and more costly the intermittent engine operation becomes. Those emission requirements force the combustion engine to become smaller and smaller, and the range requirements force the battery and motors to become bigger and bigger and become the main source of power without imposing a name. So they've made an effective standard. Only one vehicle ever complied with the CARB standard, and it never sold that well. In the end, the standard never made sense. But to comply with the NEV standard, which is key to sales in the world's largest car market, it doesn't matter what you call the vehicle, but the result is going to meet the design criteria for an EV first hybrid, with, in theory, the one possible omission of being built on an EV-based platform. End result, there's a very real category, but with no official name other than within China. NEV. Outside China, there's no recording of data based on the real category. So looking again at the global market share of EVs versus PHEVs, everyone sees this data, which shows PHEVs rising, but much slower than EVs. And what's hidden is the split, which is shown here, which reveals the reality that while one type of PHEV is falling in sales, the other type is rising in sales even faster than EVs. This very significant trend is hidden by grouping both types together and just calling them all PHEVs. And the most important part, the correlation between EV success and PHEV success. In effect, the ability to have a solution for everyone with just one platform is completely obscured. Okay, why ominous? This graph shows how BYD caught Tesla using total EV platform sales instead of just EV sales. It's the combination that makes the difference, and the combination that's allowed Jim Farley of Ford to see BYD, not Tesla, as the competitor, not just in EVs, but for everything. But BYD caught Tesla in 2022, but didn't catch Ford until 2025. And that Fortune magazine report is 2026. Chinese brands saw the trend in 2025, and now every Chinese brand who didn't already have EV-based plug-in hybrids by 2025, which includes XPeng, Zeekr, Avatar, NIO, Xiaomi, Ito, and GWM, have all released or announced one in the past 18 months. And that's joining brands who are already there: Chang'an, Li Auto, Dongfeng, Seres, Leapmotor, Nita, etc., etc. And if you follow car releases from China, what you see is the term hybrid is basically assumed to mean a version of an EV with a genset where the frunk would be. And it seems most new EV releases have an option for this type of hybrid, a version with a genset where the frunk would be. And in the case of some models, mostly larger vehicles, they're only available as this hybrid version. China has a step ahead. They saw it first, they've responded first, and there's a significant number of brands with the concept of making vehicles for everyone based on EV platforms. Now, Western brands? I've got a chart here, which is on screen, of brands and their releases of EV-based plug-in hybrids. But in so many cases, they're not based on platform sharing with EVs, which is the proven recipe for success. And with EVs now reaching price parity with traditional combustion vehicles, and genset EVs so far costing less, they can be below cost parity. It's covering all bases with vehicles built on one platform at a lower cost than than traditional vehicles, and traditional manufacturers are not only left behind, but their product cycles take 7 years to change. I previously looked at the top 10 list of vehicle makers for 2022. By 2025, there were 2 Chinese brands, the world's largest makers of EV-based hybrids or genset-equipped EVs, BYD and Geely, which brings us to what's next. And that is, as can be seen in the video linked in the description on making sense of so many rising Chinese car brands, it'll almost certainly be a very difficult few years for established brands. And almost certainly that Chinese brands in the top 10 will rise from 2 to probably 5 by 2030. And in a world that's already outsourced so much of manufacturing to China, Chinese car brands taking over will disrupt significantly the balance of the world's economy. Whilst if you walk into an appliance store today, maybe most of the appliances are actually made in China, but they still have traditional brands. What's happening with cars is a step beyond that. It's actually the Chinese brands, Chinese designs, completely Chinese, threatening to take over the lead of one of the world's major industries. And the impact of that on global stability? Well, that's to be examined in another video. For more of this type of content on the changes that come with our journey to a new age, please like and subscribe and click the bell.